Well, I thought we'd talk about preppers. Some guy on the internet put out a blog that made me think about all this stuff, and I dug out a few items. This was written by Mel Tappan, December 1976, in the Guns and Ammo magazine. It says, make preparations in advance. You never have trouble if you are prepared for it. Now, the thing that really got me, the few words that the man said really stuck in my my mind. Let me unzoom this again. Said, really, without being aware of it, most of us have subcontracted all of our life support activities to other people, corporations, government bodies, and machines. Not only does this circumstance contribute to the sense of frustration which is symbolic of modern man, it is life-threatening should there be an interruption of these vital services. It says, what would you do, for example, a week from next Wednesday? There was no gasoline at the pumps, no food in the supermarket, no electric power or city water. The banks had all closed and a mob had formed in the center of town, looting and burning out of frustration and fear. Could your family survive even for a few weeks where you are without additional food or water, or perhaps with no police or fire protection? You got to consider the fact, people, that most of the people in the United States, 90% of the American people, live in cities. Their food and clothing comes from the labor of others. Various forms of energy are processed and delivered to their homes by others. The shelter they live in was probably built by others, is protected by fire and others from intrusions more or less successfully. Because of this common interdependence, which is the normal for a complex civilization, we tend to lose sight on just how vulnerable we really are, how unable we are through our own direct efforts to provide the core necessities which we require to support our lives. So, this fellow here, his name was Kirk Saxon. He put out this thing, I'm thinking early 70s. I put this one out. This is called the Survivalism. This is the first one. And then he put out another volume. I'll zoom in on here a little bit. Kirk Saxon, Volume 2. And let's see, he also put this out. Full-time home food processing. There was another one, The Poor Man's James Bond. Here's another thing that came out during that time. To Break a Tyrant's Chain. It's something to think about. A lot of this stuff opened up my mind, you know, in the late 1970s. Hang on a second. Don't make this too long. Hold on a second and look at this guy's blog. Okay, let's go up here. Straighten this up a little bit. Okay. I don't say when he put this out. His name is Derek James. I'll put a link to this so you can go look at it yourself. You see this guy stocking up on a bunch of stuff, getting ready, just, you know, to be prepared. The meaning of prepper is someone preparing for a social collapse, a natural disaster, or any other type of large-scale event that would disrupt life as we know it. The founding fathers of survivalism include Don Stevens, Howard Ruff, Mel Tappan, Ragnar Benson, and Kirk Saxon. I'll zoom that in just a little bit. Those are the founding fathers. Now, thank God during this time, when I caught on to it, was the Mother Earth News. That helped too. These people were saying to hell with city life and working in meaningless jobs, and they wanted to get back to the land. That's where everything comes from. It comes from the land. So despite bad actors calling themselves preppers or other media labeling them as such, most preppers are entirely reasonable and rational. There are different kinds of preppers: bushcrafters, survivalists, homesteaders, tactical preppers, doomsday preppers, and others. Basic definition of a prepper: a person who believes in a catastrophic disaster or emergency is likely to occur in the future and makes active preparations for it, typically by stockpiling food, ammunition, and other supplies. Well, even if you look at the book of Revelations, they tell you that, something's coming. It's the beginning. Fascination with the end of the world and fear of it has always been and will be forever with us. 1970s, back to the land movement. The 70s was the growth of be considered prepping today by standards, fresh off the civil unrest of the 1960s, the Vietnam War, the facing of the new perceived threat prompted all by oil embargoes and fears of environmental catastrophes. Many pursuing a back-to-the-land movement, which is the equivalent of today's off-the-grid lifestyle, focusing on simplicity and self-reliance. Now it says here, Mother Earth News was launched in 1970. The very popular Foxfire books began in 1972. Robert Preston's How to Prepare for the Coming Crash, 1972. Making the Best of Basics, 1974. Founding Fathers of Survivalism. Don Stephens. He was one of the first person who called a prepper, and he called them retreaters. In his book from 1968 called Retreaters Bibleophacy, used a phrase to describe people who were making plans for what they might be called today bugging out. These retreaters were getting ready for a collapse in the monetary system that would consequently lead to a social collapse. Howard Ruff, he's also considered one of the core founders of survivalism. He was a financial advisor who believed that the United States was headed for another Great Depression following the 1973 oil crisis. He advised investors to put their money into gold, silver, and other hard assets. Mel Tappan. Mel Tappan began his foray into survivalism, as many people do, through an interest in firearms. From that, he made contact with Don Stephens and began presenting a lecture with him. He wrote a monthly column for Guns and Ammo magazine titled Survival Notes. In 1977, his book, Survival Guns, still sold today, solidified his presence in the survival sphere and established him as a leading expert on all things survival. Since the concept of most fundamental to long-term disaster preparedness in retreating is having a safe place to go to avoid the concentrated violence destined to erupt in the cities. When you have a growing apprehensive awareness of what time grows short, you want to relocate away from these areas of the greatest dangers. Ragnar Benson. Let's see. He wrote quite a few books. He wrote on survival retreats, poaching animals, creating false identification, firearms, explosive, improvised weapons. You get the idea. Kurt Saxon. He is actually the person claiming to have coined the first term survivalist to refer to people making preparation for society collapse. He began publishing a newsletter called The Survivor in the 1970s. The newsletter contained reprints of 19th century and early 20th century writings on pioneer life, skills, technology that could be used without modern life dependencies. Dismayed with, he was saying that the retreaters and survivalists, they're dismayed with modern life. He referred to the contemporary society that we know today as a Disneyland for dummies. Retreater and survivalist were used interchangeable for a long time, but two terms eventually took on different meaning. Retreater began to mean someone who was doing just that, retreating from danger. For many, this was seen as weak or cowardice. Survivalist, on the other hand, had a strong ring to it, describing one who was prepared to take aggressive action. My definition of survival is a self-sufficient person who trusts himself with his abilities more than he trusts the establishment. Then you had the Cold War, that kind of spurred people on. Y2K, that made them think a little harder. September 11th, 2001, you know, people were prepared, but they had kind of, you know, backed away from a lot of things, but then they began buying up a whole mess of freeze-dried food. Okay? Hurricane Katrina, I mean, that woke up some people. The government had a disastrous response, leading many to realize that in time of crisis, they truly cannot rely on government to help them. You've got to rely on yourself. The lawlessness that ensued afterward, looting wealthy neighborhoods, and they began hiring private security firms. Civilian guns were seized by police. It was after Katrina that the new prepper sites began taking shape all over the internet, whether it was Katrina or the other events. But after Katrina, personal preparedness was no longer a fringe idea. Then you had the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009. And you had the flu come in. No one knew how bad the pandemic would get. As many preppers had warned, there was a run on grocery stores. Toilet paper, hand sanitizer, pasta, flour, other staples flew off the shelves and became difficult to buy. Airlines came to a standstill. Borders were closed. Stay-at-home orders were put into place. No one knew what to expect. Everybody wished they had prepared in advance. American survivalists felt vindicated after the lockdown because they had beans, bullets, and Band-Aids. Different types of preppers, yep. But they all have the same goal, personal preparedness. That brings them to prepping the reasons they prep. It's often what distinguishes them, and because of the negative stuff, they don't want to be affiliated with certain subsets, also known as not that kind of prepper. Bushcrafts and survivalists, yep, they both emerged. They kind of developed into the same thing. Homesteaders. You have a lot of that going on today. People want to get back to the land. Jobs, people, are meaningless. You live in this city and you're a programmer or whatever you do, your life is pretty much meaningless. You've got no room to move around. You can't breathe. You can't grow anything. You're not allowed. Like Mel Tappan said, these preppers come to prepping as a natural extension of interest in firearms and personal defense. They enjoy going to the shooting range, buying the latest high-end firearm and associate accessories, researching what flashlight will give them the most power for batteries, etc. And they became the practical preppers. Then you had the doomsday. As the title suggests, it's the most extreme end of the prepper spectrum, whether it's conspiracy theories, driving your action, or anyway, this regardless of their particular doomsday scenario, they're living and breathing prepping day in and day out. They're stockpiling ammunition, building bunkers, learning bushcraft, stocking up on year's supply of food, and generally preparing to disengage from modern society at a moment's notice. The devotion to their life and their wallets are all things preparing. So what is a prepper? As you can see, there's no one definition for all scenarios and all people, but it should suffice to say that if you are here following this site, and if you subscribe to our emails and follow similar sites, this is the key. You take measures to prepare for future uncertainties. You're a prepper of some type. There's a pretty good article the guy wrote here. I'll put a link to this. I'll let you guys go read it. I just glanced over a bunch of this stuff to get the video out there. But people, there are plenty of books out there on tell you how to survive, how to learn skills. Another thing I want to warn about too. Don't trust the internet to always be there. If you're relying on the internet and the information that's in there, it won't always be there. Buy some hardback books so you can pick them up at any time so you know what the hell to do. I won't get this guy's name in here. Derek James. Well, guys, I want to thank you for watching. Like I said, you know what, Kitty? I know you want to be a survivor. Huh? You want to be a survivor? That's trouble. As you can tell, it is trouble. Okay, fat girl. But this is one of the main things that got me going when the thing first came out. Like I said, it was December 1976. And just reading them things, you know, what would you and your family do? Say in a week's time, everything just went to hell. And when I read the thing about, you know, all your food and labor and your clothing, all that stuff comes from the labor of other people, that really got me to thinking. You know, 90% of American people live in cities. Their food and clothing come from the labor of others. Energy is processed and delivered to their homes by others, and is protected by fire and other things by cops and stuff. So because of this common interdependence, we are vulnerable. So that's why you become a prepper, so you can take care of yourself, because you cannot count on the government. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching.